You know that feeling when you should be more informed about something, but even thinking about all that research just makes you want to nope right out of there.
Yeah, I get that.
Well, that's exactly why we do these deep dives. And today we're tackling agriculture in India.
Which honestly affects us all, even if we don't realize it.
Exactly. And I gotta say, the stuff you sent over is fascinating. I was blown away by how much India's agricultural sector has grown.
It's huge GE. It supports a big chunk of India's population and adds almost 20% to their GDP.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
And their growth rate has been incredible, over 4% annually for the past 5 years. They've got surplus food grains, and they're exporting a ton, too.
Right. They're a powerhouse when it comes to rice and wheat, and they're #1 globally for things like milk, pulses, and spices.
Okay, color me impressed. But I'm guessing a system this big has some challenges, too, right?
Oh, definitely. Even with that impressive growth, one of the biggest things they're dealing with is low productivity.
What do you mean?
Well, their crump yields are noticeably lower than other major producers.
That's interesting because it seems like most government support goes towards rice and wheat.
Yeah, it is a bit of a paradox.
So what's causing this productivity gap? What's holding them back?
It's a bunch of things, really. For one, they've got super fragmented land holdings, which makes modernization and investment tough.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Then there's always the issue of unpredictable weather, especially because so much relies on rainfall.
Right.
And of course, we can't forget their marketing infrastructure.
Right.
They end up losing a lot after harvest because of that.
Sounds like they've got a lot to juggle.
They do. But the good news is they're not just standing still. The government's actively trying to tackle these challenges.
Good. So what are they doing?
Well, one of their key strategies has been around the minimum support price, or MSP.
Oh, yeah. I read a bit about that.
Back in 2018-19, they made a big decision to set it at 1.5 times the production cost for certain crops.
To make sure farmers get a decent return.
Exactly. And it's directly connected to their push for crop diversification.
I see. So instead of just rice and wheat, they're encouraging farmers to grow other things.
Exactly. Pulses, oilseeds, and what they call Sri Anna, which are nutrient-rich cereals.
Shriana, interesting.
Yeah, and last year, lentils got the highest MSP increase out of all the pulses.
How much was it?
It was a pretty big jump, 89% over the production cost.
Wow. Seems like a smart way to address nutritional needs and market demands.
Right.
So does this diversification strategy tie into their sustainability goals too?
Absolutely. It's all about moving away from water-intensive crops like rice and towards more climate-resilient options.
Like what?
Things like pulses and those nutrient-rich cereals.
Yeah.
And they've even got dedicated programs under the Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana to specifically reduce reliance on paddy cultivation.
Like what kind of programs?
One example is the crop diversification program.
So they're thinking long term.
Yeah, for sure. Not just about yields, but the environment and resource management, too.
It seems like they're putting a lot of emphasis on investment too. I read about gross capital formation, or GCF.
Oh, yeah, that's key.
So that's basically about investing in physical things like machinery and infrastructure.
Exactly. The things they need for modernization.
Right. Are they investing a lot in that?
Well, GCF in agriculture has been growing steadily, mostly driven by public investment.
Okay.
But there's a catch. Remember those fragmented land holdings we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, they make it much harder to increase investment.
Oh, I see.
Plus, the private corporate sector isn't really involved that much either. Their share is still under 2%.
So they really need to attract more private investment if they want to transform the sector for good.
Absolutely. And it seems like they get that. Back in 2016, a DFI report recommended a 12.5% annual growth rate for agriculture investment if they wanted to double farmers' income.
Wow, that's ambitious. But you're right, it's probably necessary given their goals.
Yeah.
But it's not just about growing the food, right? You've got to get it from the farm to the people who are going to eat it.
That's a whole other challenge.
Exactly. What are they doing about marketing?
Well, their agricultural marketing network has some serious bottlenecks. There's limited access to formal institutions, too much reliance on middlemen, and those traditional agricultural produce market committees, or APMCs, are really restrictive.
So the whole system needs a revamp to make it more accessible and transparent.
Exactly. And that's where ENAME comes in,
ENAME.
the Electronic National Agriculture Market.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It's basically a digital marketplace for agricultural products.
Right.
It connects farmers directly with buyers all over the country, helps them get better prices, and makes the whole system more efficient. And it's really taken off. Over 1.77 crore farmers and 2.56 lakh traders are registered on the platform.
That's amazing.
The government's also been promoting farmer produce organizations, or FPOs.
Those are like cooperatives, right?
Yeah, exactly. Farmers team up to get more bargaining power and stuff.
Right. So does this E&M thing actually work?
Well, studies have shown that it's had a positive impact, but there's still some kinks they're working out, like making sure farmers know about it and getting the infrastructure up to speed, especially for quality testing.
So those typical growing pains that come with any big tech rollout.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we got all this food being produced, but what about making sure everyone has enough to eat? How does India handle food security?
That's where their food management policies come in. And honestly, the scale of what they've achieved is amazing.
So what's their system like?
It focuses on getting grains at fair prices, distributing them especially to those who need it most, and keeping enough stored away for emergencies. The National Food Security Act, or NFSA, and the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana, or PMGKA, are the big ones there.
I've heard those names, but remind me what they actually do.
Well, the NFSA provides subsidized food grains like rice and wheat to a huge portion of the population.
How much we're talking?
Like 2/3 of the people benefit from it. It's a massive safety net.
Wow. And the PMGKA takes it a step further, right? Free food grains during crises.
Yeah. During the pandemic, they reached over 81 crore beneficiaries. It was huge.
That's incredible.
Oh, and they've also got this system called ON or RC, One Nation, One Ration Card.
Catchy.
It lets people, especially migrant workers, access their food rations anywhere in the country. Super helpful for those who move around for work.
It's amazing how they're using technology to make these programs more efficient. But all of this has got to cost a lot, right? Buying all that grain at MSP and then selling it below cost.
You're right, it does. And that brings us to a key question. How are they managing those costs, and what are the long-term impacts of these programs, both financially and for sustainability? That's something we'll dig into further in part 2.
It's pretty amazing how India is managing to balance all these priorities, you know. They're trying to ensure food security for so many people while also pushing for things like modernization and sustainability. And making sure the sector is profitable. Yeah, it's a real balancing act. On the one hand, you have this immediate need to feed a huge population, and on the other, you've got these long-term goals about efficiency and the environment and helping farmers earn more.
Exactly. And the cost of those food security programs is a big part of it, too. Remember how we talked about the economic cost of getting grains at MSP and then selling them at a discount? Well, that cost has been going up in recent years.
So how do they balance all of that? Making food affordable for people, but also making sure farmers are getting a fair price.
That's the big question, isn't it? And this is where it gets really complicated. The MSP system, while it's super important for helping farmers, has also been criticized for messing with market signals. Some people say it leads to too much production of certain crops like rice and wheat, which they already have plenty of.
So it's those unintended consequences that can happen even when a policy is well-intentioned. Makes sense, though, if you're only focusing on a few crops, it can create imbalances.
Exactly, and that's where their crop diversification strategy comes in. By encouraging farmers to grow things other than water-intensive crops like rice, they're hoping to create a more balanced and sustainable system.
So it's about diversifying what's being grown, A&D, what people are eating. It's like a holistic approach. But what about the farmers themselves? We talked about land holdings and investment, but what about things like credit and insurance? Those are essential for any farmer.
Oh, absolutely. And the Indian government has actually been doing quite a bit in those areas. They've really been working on improving access to affordable credit for farmers, especially through things like the Kisan Credit Card.
The KCC.
Yeah. It's been huge in helping farmers get away from those informal lenders who often charge crazy high interest rates.
So it's about giving farmers the tools they need to invest in their farms and make smart decisions.
Exactly. And then there's insurance, which is like a safety net, especially in a country where the weather can be so unpredictable. Their main crop insurance scheme, the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, or PMFBY, is one of the biggest in the world when it comes to how many farmers are enrolled.
Wow, that's amazing. So they're really trying to cover all the bases.
Yeah.
How effective is this insurance, though? Does it really help farmers when something bad happens?
Honestly, it's gotten mixed reviews. While it's definitely helped a lot of farmers cope with things like natural disasters, there has been some criticism about the high premiums and delays in getting claims paid out, and sometimes there are transparency issues too.
So some room for improvement there. But overall, it seems like they're on the right track, providing farmers with these financial tools and safety nets.
I think so, and it's important to remember that India's agricultural landscape is incredibly vast and diverse. What works in one place might not work in another.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's
Yep.
about finding those tailored solutions, those local approaches that really address the unique challenges and opportunities of each region. But let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that's really caught my attention, the role of technology in Indian agriculture.
Ah, yes.
We mentioned E&M and marketing, but I'm curious about this whole digital agriculture revolution that's happening.
Oh, it's fascinating stuff. It's basically about using data and AI and all these cutting-edge technologies to make farming better.
So like precision farming, but on a massive scale.
Exactly. Their digital agriculture mission is all about improving everything from how crops are planned and pests are managed to soil health and irrigation.
I can see how that could have a huge impact on productivity, A&D
Yeah,
sustainability.
sure. And there are some really cool innovations happening. For example, they've been using drones to map farmland check on crop health and even spray fertilizers and pesticides super precisely.
That's wild. It sounds incredibly efficient, and it could really help minimize the impact on the environment. But I also wonder about those traditional farming communities. How are they adapting to all this new technology?
That's a really important question, and it's something policymakers are thinking about a lot. It's crucial to make sure these technologies are accessible to all farmers, not just the ones with lots of land or resources. Otherwise, you risk making the gap between the haves and have-nots even bigger.
Yeah. Equity and inclusion have to be a priority with any kind of technological revolution.
Yeah.
But let's move beyond tech for a second and talk about something else that's interesting. The allied sectors.
Allied sectors.
Yeah. Things like animal husbandry, dairying, and fisheries. I've heard they're growing really fast and adding a lot to both rural incomes and the overall economy.
They are. There's a big increase in demand within India for things like milk, eggs, and meat. Plus, India has some natural advantages. They have a ton of livestock and a long history of animal husbandry.
So it makes sense to build on those strengths. Are they
Right.
exporting these products too?
They are, but not as much as crops like rice and wheat. But there's a ton of potential there, especially with the global demand for protein going up all the time.
So these allied sectors could be a game changer for India's agricultural economy, maybe even surpassing traditional crops eventually.
It's definitely possible. And the government is supporting these sectors with things like the National Livestock Mission, which is focused on breeding animals, keeping them healthy, and improving infrastructure.
So they're trying to make the most of those opportunities. What about the environmental side of livestock production, though? It uses a lot of resources, and there are valid concerns about its impact on climate change and biodiversity.
That's a good point. And sustainability is just as important in the allied sectors as it is with crops. They need to encourage practices that minimize the environmental impact, like managing feed, efficiently reducing waste, and preventing diseases.
It's all about that balance, increasing production while protecting the environment for the future.
It's a global challenge for sure. But speaking of sustainability, there's another interesting trend in India that's gaining traction: organic and natural farming.
Ah, yes. The move towards chemical-free agriculture. I've been hearing more and more about that globally. How big is it in India?
It's still pretty small in terms of the total amount of land, but it's definitely growing. People are becoming more health conscious and aware of the environment. And get this, Sikkim is actually the first state in the world to be completely organic. Other states are starting to follow their lead.
Wow, that's amazing. So what's the government doing to help farmers switch to organic?
They've got a couple of programs like the Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana or PKVY, which gives farmers money to adopt organic practices. And they're also promoting organic farming through those clusters and FPOs we talked about.
So they're using both financial incentives, A&D community-based strategies, but can organic farming really feed a country as big as India? Doesn't it mean lower yields?
That's a common idea, but it's not always true. Yields might be a bit lower at first while farmers are transitioning, but there's more and more evidence that with the right management techniques, organic farming can be just as productive as conventional farming in the long run.
So it's not just about idealism.
Yeah,
There's a practical side to this push for organic farming.
definitely. And when you add in the benefits for soil health and biodiversity and reducing chemical contamination, it starts to look like a really good option.
I see what you mean. It seems like India is taking this big picture approach, not just focusing on how much food they can produce, but on the health and resilience of their whole agricultural system.
Exactly. And one of the most important parts of that is water management.
Ah, yes, water. You can't have agriculture without it, especially in a country like India where water scarcity is a big problem in many areas.
It's crucial, and they're dealing with it in a bunch of different ways. For example, they've got the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchay Yojana, or PMKSY, which is all about expanding irrigation and promoting water efficiency.
So getting water to more land, A&D, making sure it's not being wasted.
Exactly. Two birds, one stone. They're also promoting things like drip irrigation and sprinkler systems, which deliver water right to the roots of the plants, so less is wasted.
Makes sense, especially in those areas that are really struggling with water shortages. But what about the places that depend heavily on rainfall? How are they handling the fact that the monsoons are becoming less predictable?
Well, for them, there's the Rain-Fed Area Development Program, which focuses on drought-resistant crops, improving soil moisture, and water harvesting.
So making the whole system more resilient and adaptable.
Exactly. And there are some really creative water management practices happening at the local level, too. I was reading about a project in Karnataka where they automated their irrigation system using sensors and real-time data to figure out the best way to distribute water.
That's pretty cool. So they're using data to make smarter decisions about water.
They are. And you see similar things all over India, from rainwater harvesting in Rajasthan to community-run irrigation systems in the Himalayas. It's inspiring to see how they're adapting to local conditions and coming up with unique solutions.
It reminds you that sustainability isn't just about big government programs. It's about those grassroots efforts and the local knowledge that's so important for long-term success.
I totally agree. Speaking of grassroots initiatives, there's another key player in Indian agriculture that we haven't talked about yet, cooperatives.
Ah, yes. The power of working together. I've heard a lot about India's cooperative movement, especially in the dairy industry.
It's remarkable. Cooperatives have really helped farmers, especially the smaller ones, have more control over their livelihoods and access to markets.
So it's strength in numbers. Farmers sharing resources and knowledge and getting better prices for their products.
Exactly. The dairy cooperative movement, led by brands like Amul, is a perfect example. They've helped millions of dairy farmers have a reliable income and a stronger voice.
It's a great model.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard they're doing it in other areas too.
They are. There are cooperatives for everything now: fruits, vegetables, fisheries, even organic farming. The government's been encouraging this through things like those farmer producer organizations or FPOs that we mentioned earlier.
So they're really fostering that community spirit and empowering farmers.
Yeah,
It makes sense that would be important for the long-term health of the sector.
absolutely. And besides the economic and social benefits, cooperatives are also great for promoting sustainable practices.
Really? How so?
They often provide training and resources to their members about things like saving water, keeping the soil healthy, and managing pests without chemicals. And they can help farmers get organic certification and connect them with markets that want their sustainably produced goods.
So everyone wins. Farmers get a better living.
Mhm.
A&D, the environment is protected.
Mm.
I'm starting to see how all these different pieces fit together. The diversification technology, water management cooperatives, organic farming. It's a really integrated approach. Very forward thinking.
It is. And there's one more piece we need to add to get the full picture: agricultural research and education.
Ah, yes. You need that solid foundation of knowledge to have a truly innovative and sustainable system. What's happening in India on that front?
They have a really strong research network led by the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, or ICAR. They've been essential for developing new types of crops, better livestock broods, and promoting sustainable farming practices.
It sounds like they're serious about pushing the boundaries of what we know about agriculture, finding solutions to the challenges farmers are facing, and making sure those innovations actually reach the people who need them.
That's exactly it. And it's not just about the research, it's also about education and training. ICAR has this huge network of agricultural universities and extension services that teach farmers the skills they need to succeed in this rapidly changing environment.
So they're investing in the future of building a new generation of farmers who are ready to tackle whatever challenges come their way.
Exactly. That's what's so exciting about Indian agriculture. It's a story of resilience, innovation, and a real dedication to sustainability. They're not just feeding their own people, they're helping to shape the future of food production.
It's inspiring, for sure. But we do have to be realistic. There are still big challenges ahead, and we need to acknowledge how complex and nuanced this whole sector is. There are always going to be trade-offs to consider.
Definitely. There's no quick fix for all of India's agricultural challenges. It's going to take continued commitment to innovation, collaboration, and a willingness to adapt.
It's an ongoing journey of learning, experimenting, and figuring out what works best in different situations.
Exactly. And that leads us to another important part of India's agricultural story: the food processing industry.
Ah, yes. The step between the farm and our plates. This is where all those value-added products come in, right? The snacks and the ready-to-eat meals and all the things that make our lives easier and tastier.
You got it. And India's food processing industry has huge EE potential given how much and how many different kinds of agricultural products they have. It could create a ton of jobs, reduce those post-harvest losses we talked about, and help farmers earn even more.
Sounds like a win-win-win. So is India taking advantage of this potential?
They're making progress, but there's still a ways to go. There are some obstacles like problems with infrastructure, not enough cold storage facilities, and difficulty getting financing.
So those same old obstacles are popping up again, but this time in the processing sector.
Yeah, but there's some good news too. The government has been taking steps to address these challenges. They've started things like the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana, which provides money to help build food processing infrastructure.
So they're trying to make it easier for businesses to invest in this sector.
Exactly. And they're also promoting initiatives like the PM formalization of micro food processing enterprises scheme, which is all about supporting those smaller food businesses and helping them get access to loans and markets.
It sounds like they're taking a two-pronged approach, supporting big investments and those smaller homegrown businesses that are so important in rural areas.
They are. And when you think about how much potential there is for innovation in this sector, it's really exciting.
I can only imagine. There are so many possibilities, from traditional Indian foods to those modern, ready-to-eat meals, and they can market all of that globally. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it.
Me too. And India is already making moves in that direction. They've been exporting more and more processed foods, everything from spices and pickles to frozen fruits and vegetables.
It seems like they could become a real global powerhouse in the food processing industry, using their amazing culinary heritage and all that agricultural produce.
They absolutely could. But to get there, they'll need to keep investing in infrastructure, technology, and training. And they'll need to focus on quality and food safety to meet the standards of those international markets.
So it's not just about making food, it's about creating a brand that people trust.
Exactly. And that leads us to the last part of India's agricultural journey, making sure all these great products get to the people who need them the most.
Right, we talked about those big food security programs, the NFSA and the PMGKAY, which give millions of people subsidized or free food grains. But I'm guessing that's just one part of the equation. You also need a whole system for getting the food, storing it, and transporting it all over this huge, diverse country.
Absolutely. It's mind-blowing when you think about the logistics of feeding over 1.3 billion people.
It really is.
India's food management system is one of the biggest and most complex in the world. It's this huge network of government agencies, private businesses, and countless individuals working together to get food from farms to tables.
It shows how committed they are to food security. They've managed to lift millions out of poverty and hunger with these programs.
It's truly remarkable, but we also have to recognize the challenges. There's waste, inefficiency, sometimes corruption, and the ongoing debate about whether these big food subsidy programs are sustainable in the long run.
So it's that same balancing act again, making food affordable for everyone, but also making sure the system can afford it and that it's not harming the environment.
You got it. And that brings us to one of the most interesting and complicated parts of India's food management system, the role of the Food Corporation of India.
The FCI.
Yep, that's the government agency that handles getting the food, storing it, and distributing it.
Right.
They're huge. They have warehouses and operations all over India. They play a big part in keeping food prices stable, managing those buffer stocks we talked about, and making sure there's always enough food to go around even when there are shortages.
It sounds like a crucial part of the system, but I imagine it's got its own set of challenges given how big it is.
Oh, it does. The FCI has been criticized for not being efficient enough, having high storage costs, and sometimes having corruption problems. There's a lot of discussion about how to reform the organization and make it work better for both farmers and consumers.
It seems like it's always a work in progress, just like so many other aspects of Indian agriculture.
It is, but even with those challenges, the FCI is still playing a vital role in making sure millions of Indians have food security. And when you think about how massive their operations are, it's pretty amazing.
Definitely puts things in perspective. It makes you realize how connected everything is, from the farmers to the government to the people working in those FCI warehouses. It's a whole web of relationships, policies, and innovations, all focused on feeding a nation.
It really is. And that's what makes India's agricultural story so compelling. It's not just about numbers and statistics. It's about people, their lives, their resilience, and their connection to the land.
It's a story of hope and challenges and the constant search for a better future. And there's so much more to explore. But for now, let's take a break and absorb all this information. We'll be back with part 3, where we'll tie everything together and dive into some thought-provoking questions that'll stay with you long after this episode is over. Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From those incredible growth numbers to the challenges they're facing. And we've seen everything from high-tech stuff to those essential grassroots efforts.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind. It's such a dynamic and multifaceted system, always changing.
It's really struck me how India isn't just about producing as much food as possible. They're juggling so many things. Food security, modernization, sustainability, empowering farmers. It's really a holistic approach.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so complex and so interesting. It's like this huge puzzle where economic growth, social equity, environmental protection, and technological advancement all have to fit together.
And it's not like a static puzzle either. They're constantly experimenting, adapting their strategies to different situations. What works in one place might not work somewhere else because India is so incredibly diverse.
Exactly. One solution doesn't fit all. That's why those local initiatives we talked about, like in Karnataka and Rajasthan, are so important. They show how crucial it is to tailor solutions to the specific challenges and opportunities of each region.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the best solutions come from the ground up, from communities who understand their own needs and work together to meet them.
I totally agree. It's all about empowering those communities to take charge, like those farmer cooperatives we discussed.
Like a mole. That dairy cooperative is such an inspiring story. They've really changed the lives of millions of farmers. It shows what you can achieve through collective action.
For sure. And it's not just dairy either. We're seeing cooperatives doing great things with fruits and vegetables, fisheries, even organic farming.
Speaking of organic farming, I was really impressed by the fact that Sikkim has become a completely organic state. And it's amazing that India is investing in research to make organic farming just as productive as conventional methods. That could change everything.
It really could. It challenges the whole idea that organic farming can't feed a large population. When you add in the environmental benefits, it becomes a really strong option for the future.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the role technology is playing in all of this. From E&M, connecting farmers and buyers, to those drones mapping fields and helping to use resources more efficiently, technology is transforming Indian agriculture.
It's amazing to see. But like we said, it's also important to make sure everyone has access to these technologies, not just the farmers with a lot of resources.
Yeah, that's crucial for sure. But it seems like India is addressing that challenge by promoting things like FPOs, which help smaller farmers use technology and access markets more effectively.
Right. They're making sure everyone is included, which is so important for sustainable growth.
And let's not forget about those impressive food security programs. The NFSA and PMGKA are helping millions of people, making sure even the most vulnerable have access to food. It's incredible what they've achieved.
It really is. But it also highlights the need to keep evaluating these programs and maybe even make some changes to address concerns about cost efficiency and long-term sustainability.
That makes me think of the Food Corporation of India, or FCI. It's such a massive organization, and it plays such a key role in getting food to people. But they've also faced criticism and calls for reform.
It seems like continuous improvement is a big part of India's agricultural journey.
It is. And that's what I find so inspiring about their approach. It's a story of constant adaptation, innovation, and resilience.
For sure. And what's really exciting is how they're blending traditional knowledge with modern technology and encouraging community-based solutions alongside government programs. It's not about choosing one or the other. It's about finding that sweet spot where they work together.
I think that's the biggest lesson we can take away from all of this. India's story shows that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the challenges of agriculture and food security. It's about having a multi-pronged approach, a holistic vision that takes into account everyone's needs.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Indian agriculture, we're left with a lot to think about. Given the growing global demand for food, how can other countries learn from India's experiences and innovations? How can they apply those lessons to their own challenges?
That's a great question. The things India has learned, both the successes and the setbacks, could have a huge impact on how we produce food, not just in South Asia, but around the world.
It really shows how interconnected we all are in this. As we face climate change, resource scarcity, and a growing global population, we need to learn from each other, share knowledge, and work together to create a more sustainable and food-secure future for everyone.
I completely agree.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder these big questions. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the world around us.